Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We're in Mishna Yevamos, Parak Zayin, chapter 16, Mishna Daled, Mishnah 4. All right. Nafal Amayim. Here the story is the husband of this woman, fell into water. And now I'm going to be discussing if they see him fall into the water, okay, and they didn't see him come up. They didn't see him come up. He fell into the water, and, they did not see this man come up. They waited there long enough that normally a person would not be able to survive underwater, and he didn't come up. However, his body was not found. So says the Mishnah, Bein sheyesh lehen saif, bein she'ein lehen saif. Whether these waters have an end or not. What that means is whether the shores are visible. Shores being visible means it's a small body of water, or a small enough body of water, and a person standing at one shore can see all its shores. So it's like imagine a lake, right? Where you're standing, you can see all around the bank of the lake. Safe. Whether we're talking about water that doesn't have an end, the shores aren't visible, right? You can see maybe some of the shores, but you can't see all of them. It's like the ocean; it's a river, right? There's only so much you can see. In either case, even in the case of the water that you could see all its shores, which would seemingly mean, therefore, that if you were there and you waited, it didn't come up, right? That you would, if he would have come up, you would have seen because you were watching. But that's not what happened. Nonetheless, Asura, she still is considered forbidden. We still do not have enough, it's not considered enough basis to allow her to remarry. And that's because even though the shores are visible and you didn't see anything happen, it is possible that he survived in the water for a long time and emerged after the witnesses left. That is what this opinion of the Mishnah holds. Okay? So even like in a case where the shores aren't visible, all right, he could have come up on the side that you can't see, maybe far away, but he came up on the other side where you couldn't see. But even where you should have been able to have seen all the side or anywhere he could have come up from, because you could see those areas, nonetheless, we still consider the possibility that he survived and you didn't see. Amar Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Meir said. Now, Rabbi Meir is going to support what we just read, because what we just read is Rabbi Meir's opinion. But he supports it. The story took place by a person who fell into a large pit of water. If it was a large pit of water, that means you could see, all around the water. And guess what? 3 days later, the guy came up. So Reb Meir says, you see from there that Reb Meir says you see that it's possible that you could survive somehow or another a long time in the water. Now, on the bottom, they bring down from the commentary Aruch LaNer, presumably, he managed to keep his head out of the water by some means. Reb Meir holds that in every case, we must suspect that a similar thing happened. I mean, if you were watching and you didn't see anything, how did he keep his head out of the water? Well, I guess you have to assume that you were looking and you missed it. It's kind of hard to notice sometimes, hard to see everything sometimes. And therefore, although you could have been there for a very long time, and under normal circumstances, a person would not be able to survive, Reb Meir said from this story, you see, that it's possible that it could happen. And therefore, in any similar case where this happens, you have to suspect that this is what could have happened to that man, and you cannot permit his wife to remarry because it's certain that he died. It's not certain that he died, and therefore you cannot let him get married. That is Reb Meir's opinion. Reb Meir says this both by where the shores can be seen or not, because in the story, by the case of the pit, that's an example of Maim Yesh Lem Saif. They have an end. You could see all around, and nonetheless, the man survived, and therefore we have to say that in those kinds of cases, we have to be strict, and we cannot allow her to remarry. Rabbi Yossi said, now Rabbi Yossi argues. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. The story took place by a blind man that he went to immerse in a cave, meaning there was water in the cave, and he went to immerse. And he wasn't coming up. The Yarad Meishchay Acharav. Meishchay means his guide, because he was blind. his blind went down after him, and he didn't come back either. V'sho kadesha teitzei nafsham, and they remained. The witnesses who saw this remained there, meaning both these men remained in the water enough time that they should not be able to survive. And this is what people saw. V'yisiu neshayseim, and they allowed their wives, meaning both the wife of the blind man and the wife of his guide, to remarry. Now, this is a case, if it's in a cave, that means that's mayim sheish lem seif. That's water that you can see all around. And what happened there, where he went down in the water, it didn't come up with enough time to be able to typically survive, to normally survive, we assume that he died. So you see, according to Rabbi Yossi, you see at least that when it comes to the water that has seif, the water that you could see all around, that if you wait there enough time to assume that he died, you wait there for a long time, and a person typically can't survive under those circumstances, that you may assume that he died. What does he do with Reb Meir's story? What does he say? Reb Meir's story is not true? It is true, but it was a miracle. It was a miracle. And that's not what you can, and that's not the typical. That's not, if it's a miracle, that's not what you base your concerns on. And therefore, you may assume, and the norm you may assume what's the norm, and the norm is that in those circumstances the man did not survive. And again, you're there, the witnesses were there, whoever was witnessing it was there, watched, didn't see him come up over any of the other shoreline at the end anywhere else, because it was something he could have done, he could have seen, observed, and he didn't. You could assume he's dead. V'shuv ma'isa ba'asya. Now, another story. Again, this is Rabbi Yossi continuing, in a place called Asya, be'echaj shel shaluhu layam. There was a person, they lowered him into the sea by his leg. Why were they lowering him by his leg into the sea? I'm not so sure. Probably wasn't such nice people doing it. V'loy ala b'yadam, and now then they wanted to pull him back up. And the only thing they found, and the only thing left of him was, sorry, don't give me that look, was his leg. That was the only thing left. I'm sorry, not appropriate to laugh. The only thing left was his leg. Okay? Now, Amr Chachamim, the Chachamim said, if he is, so basically the rest of his body got cut off, got separated. Now, if the leg was separated from the knee and up, meaning basically you see that what's left of him is, meaning where you see what's left is, his leg is, part of his leg above the knee is still left, which means that he was severed at that point above the knee, tinase, she's allowed to get married. In that situation, you can assume he's dead. But from the knee and below, she may not marry. Okay. Now, in this case, they lowered him into the sea. That's mayim shein lahem seif. You can't see all the shores. Okay? You can't see all the shores. Which means that he could have come up on the other side. He could have come up on the side that you can't see. Now that also seems a bit miraculous, but that Allah seems to say that you got to assume that somehow or another the water may have pulled him all the way to the other side in a way that he could survive, and you have to assume that way, that he may have, not assume, you have to be concerned they may have survived, and you didn't see him come out of the water. Now, but the way you see this from this story is because they said that depends. If he was severed from above the knee, then we could assume he's dead, which we'll have to explain soon. But if it's from the knee and down, then it's possible that he was severed from his leg, from that part of his leg, but he didn't die, he survived, and you didn't see him come up on the other side, which was why they said she may not marry. So according to Rabbi Yossi, you see that there's a distinction between the water that has seif and the water that doesn't have seif. The water where you can see the shore, you can see the shore or the land from all sides. In that situation, if the man doesn't come up from the water after the amount of time that you typically cannot survive, you can assume that he's dead. But if we're talking about water that you cannot see the shoreline on all sides, then you have to be concerned that perhaps he was schlepped all the way to the other side where you can't see, and he came up from that side. Where is he? He's gone for whatever reason. but you don't have enough to say that he's dead. Now, what's the difference between, in this case, whether he was severed from above the knee or not? So here is how they explain it. If a person's leg is cut off above the knee, that is such a serious wound that he's considered a treifa, someone who cannot possibly survive more than 12 months. Therefore, if the recovered leg has been cut off above the knee, the man's wife may marry after 12 months have passed, because even if he managed to come out of the water, he would have died from his wound. Meaning, in that point, well, it's 12 months, not bleed to death necessarily. That means we have to assume that he could have lived for 12 months because he's a treifa. Treifa means he's got a wound, he's got an injury that he will not be able to survive. It doesn't mean he may not. What's the longest he could survive? A year. That's halacha by a treifa. He could possibly survive for a year. So therefore, you got to wait for a year. If after a year he doesn't show up, you can assume that the wife can assume he's dead because from such an injury, he can't survive. So therefore, the reason why we're allowing her to marry is not because of he drowned, but because of the fact that we see that he was wounded in a way that he wouldn't be able to live more than 12 months. But in the case where his leg was cut off below, there we have to say she can't marry. Because it was cut off below, he could survive the injury. And since there is a part that you don't see, he may have come up on that side. And therefore, Rabbi Yossi said, in that case, where he was cut off below the knee, she cannot marry. So Rabbi Yossi's opinion is, it depends. If we're talking about water where you can see him come up, and he doesn't come up, you can assume that he's dead. But if we're talking about a body of water where you cannot see all sides, then you have to be concerned that he come up from the side that you may not see. I'm just going to add here just a point that I was thinking about, and that is in this case about severed above the knee, and we're saying that person's a treifa. I'm just bringing up this point. I don't know I'm not making a halachic decision here, but there are plenty of people, right, who have been wounded, right, with above the knee. Their leg comes off above the knee, and they survive, right? There are people who are in bad.
If you catch them in time.
Okay, if you catch it in time. If you catch it in time. Now, I guess, so that's a good point. You have to catch it in time. I mean, of course, they would bleed to death. But here we're saying that he's a treifa. That means somehow or another he could live for another 12 months. Even if he somehow or another wouldn't bleed to death, the assumption is he's going to die. Now, nowadays, I guess nowadays we have the means by which to, operate and do things medically that could save such a person. In those days, they may not have had it. And therefore, after such a wound, even if he survives at a certain point of time, he's not going to make it. Let me just bring up that point. All right, let's move on. Chofetz Chaim. Okay. Okay, so first we just mentioned the previous halacha was to accept rechilas, to believe it as the truth, is forbidden. Just listening to rechilas is also forbidden, like lashon hara. Even though when you're hearing it, you're not necessarily believing it, you're just listening to it. Nonetheless, when it comes to there is a difference between accepting it, meaning believing it, and just listening to it. Regarding listening to it, if you already understand from the beginning that this can be something relevant for you to know, if it's true. The person who comes to tell you, look, I need to warn you, someone wants to do something to you. Okay? Now, if it's not true, it's rechilas. But if it's true, you need to know. You need to be able to protect yourself. In that situation, you're allowed to hear it in order to protect yourself. But in that situation, even when you're using the information to protect yourself, you cannot believe it. You have to take it as a concern, as something to keep in mind. It's only about protecting yourself. You have to consider the possibility to protect yourself. Nonetheless, if we're talking about, to go ahead and to believe it, that already you can't do. So that's what he means here when he says that accepting Lashon Hara, believing Lashon Hara is worse than just hearing the Lashon Hara or the Rechilas, because if somebody wants to tell you something that is Rechilas, however, it can be something that you need to know to protect yourself, then already you're allowed to listen to it. But even then, you cannot believe it. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
When someone drowns,